Now, after Croesus was advised by the oracle to ally with the most eminent Greek city-state, he concludes that of the Ionians, the Athenians are the most eminent, and of the Dorians, the Lacedaemonians. The Athenians, originally a Pelasgian people, had occupied Attica and never moved from it. The Hellenes, who became Spartans, however, wandered extensively when finally they settled in the Peloponnese. Now here I just want to inquire and explain a little bit about the different dialects and ethnic groups in ancient Greece. So Greece in Herodotus' time was not a unified nation as it is today, but rather a country composed of many independent city-states, each being a part of a certain ethnic group, and each ethnic group speaking a slightly different dialect. The citizens of these states all spoke Greek, but slightly differently. Now there were three major dialects in ancient Greece: Ionian, Aeolian, and Dorian. And as we just previously mentioned, the Athenians were a part of the Ionian tribe, and the Lacedaemonians a part of the Dorian. Herodotus also mentioned that the Athenians were previously a Pelasgian people. Now, not much at all is known about the Pelasgians, because even in Herodotus' time, they were a very ancient race. However, they're considered to be the ancient indigenous people of the Greek world. We first hear of the Pelasgians in the poems of Homer, who mention the Pelasgians to be among the allies of Troy in the Iliad. Now, there were still Pelasgians in Herodotus' time, but it seems that Herodotus considers the Pelasgians of his own age as the remains of the older Pelasgians. He also mentions the Pelasgians of his time spoke a barbaric language, meaning that it was not Greek. But after concluding Athens and Sparta are the two most powerful Greek city-states at the time, Croesus then inquires into the current political climates of these two Greek city-states. Now, to quote Herodotus, "Well then, of these two peoples, Croesus learnt that those in Attica were currently being oppressed and divided in political strife by Pisistratus, the son of Hippocrates, who was ruling Athens as a tyrant at the time." Now, Herodotus then explains how Pisistratus had come into power, where he was ousted from political office and exiled 2 times during his reign. Now, how he managed to regain his power the first time I found particularly interesting, where he managed to receive the help of a fake Athena. So to quote Herodotus again, Pisistratus agreed to the terms and accepted the offer. They then, in order to help him return to power, contrived the silliest scheme I've ever heard of. Particularly silly in this case, for long ago the Hellenes distinguished themselves from barbarians by their superior cleverness and freedom from naive stupidity. Moreover, they carried out this scheme against the Athenians, who were at the time reputed to surpass all other Hellenes in intellect. There was a woman named Bia, in the deme of Baiania, who was almost 6 feet tall and strikingly beautiful. They dressed her up in a full set of armor, placed her in a chariot, showed her how to protect a distinguished appearance, and then drove her into the city. They sent heralds on ahead of them to tell the people to remain in the city and to proclaim, "Athenians, hail Pisistratus, and welcome him joyfully, since Athena herself is bringing him home to her own Acropolis, honouring him above all men." They repeated these words as they made their way onward, and before long, the rumour that Athena was bringing Pisistratus home had reached the demes. In the city, people actually worshipped this woman in belief that she was really the goddess, and they welcomed Pisistratus back. Now, after Croesus inquires of the Athenians, he turns his attentions to the Lacedaemonians, or the Spartans, and he hears they're currently waging war successfully against the Tegeans. Herodotus says that the Spartans were not always this powerhouse or the superstate that they're remembered for today, until a man named Lycurgus in roughly 800 BC reformed the laws of Sparta. Herodotus says that a Pythia dictated to him the way of life. However, the Lacedaemonians say he got these laws from Crete. Now, Herodotus doesn't go into too much depth on Lycurgus. However, Lycurgus is remembered as almost this semi-legendary figure, and I recommend reading Plutarch's book on his life, as Plutarch provides a more detailed account of Lycurgus' life. And here I'll provide a short summary of the life of Lycurgus and his reformations to Sparta, as detailed by Plutarch. So to quote Plutarch, "Concerning Lycurgus the Law Giver, in general, nothing can be said which is not disputed. since indeed there are different accounts of his birth, his travels, his death, and above all, of his works as lawmaker and statesman, and there is least agreement among historians as to the times in which the man lived. However, although the history of these times is such a maze, I shall try, in presenting my narrative, to follow those authors who are least contradicted, or who have the most notable witnesses for what they have written about the man. Now Plutarch then explains that Lycurgus had risen to power when his older brother, the king, had died. Lycurgus's brother, however, had died with a pregnant wife, and when this child was born, transferred his kingship to the baby. Lycurgus ruled the Spartans as the guardian of his nephew until he was old enough to rule. However, the young king's mother and her brother envied and hated Lycurgus, and they accused him of plotting the death of the king. Lycurgus decided that the only way he might avoid blame in case something should happen to the child would be to go travelling until he had grown up and fathered a son to secure the succession. So quoting Plutarch again, with this purpose he set sail, and came first to Crete. Here he studied the various forms of government and made the acquaintance of their most distinguished men. Of some things he heartily approved, and adopted some of their laws, that he may carry them home with him and put them in use. For some things he had only contempt. From Crete, Lycurgus sailed to Asia, with a desire, as we are told, of comparing the Cretan civilization, which was simple and severe, to that of the Ionians, which was extravagant and luxurious. Just as a physician compares with healthy bodies those which are unsound and sickly, he could then study the difference in their modes of life and forms of government. The Lacedaemonians missed Lycurgus sorely, and sent for him many times. They felt that their kings were such in name and station merely, but in everything else were nothing better than their subjects, while in him there was a nature fitted to lead, and a power to make men follow him. Returning then to a people thus disposed, he at once undertook to revolutionize the civil polity. He was convinced that a partial change of the laws would be of no avail whatsoever, but that he must proceed as a physician would with a patient who was deliberated and full of all sorts of diseases. He must reduce and alter the existing temperament by means of drugs and purges, and introduce a new and different regime. Full of this determination, he first made a journey to Delphi, and after sacrificing to the god and consulting the oracle, he returned with that famous response in which the Pythian priestess addressed him as beloved of the gods, and rather god than man, and said that the god had granted his prayer for good laws and promised him a constitution in which should be best in the world. So to run through the laws Lycurgus included, to quote Plutarch again: the redistribution of the land, for there was a dreadful inequality in this regard. The city was heavily burdened with indignant and helpless people, and the wealth was wholly concentrated in the hands of a few. Determined, therefore, to banish insolence and envy and crime and luxury, and those yet more deep-seated and afflictive diseases of the state, poverty and wealth, he persuaded his fellow citizens to make one parcel of all their territory and divide it up anew, and to live with one another on the basis of entire uniformity and equality, in the means of subsistence, seeking preeminence through virtue alone, assured that there was no other difference or inequality between man and man than that which was established by blame for base of actions and praise of good ones. With a view to attack luxury still more and remove the thirst for wealth, he introduced his third and most exquisite political device, namely the institution of common messes, so that they might eat with one another in companies of common and specified foods, and not to take their meals at home, reclining on costly couches and costly tables, delivering themselves into the hands of servants and cooks to be fattened in the dark like voracious animals, and ruining not only their characters but also their bodies, by surrendering them to every desire and all sorts of surfeit, which call for long sleeps, hot baths, abundant rest, and, as it were, daily nursing and tending. This was surely a great achievement, but it was still a greater one to make wealth, an object of no desire, as Theophrastus says, and even unwealth, by this community of meals and simplicity of diet. For the rich man could neither use nor enjoy nor even see or display his abundant means, when he went to the same meal as the poor man. so that it was in Sparta alone, of all the cities under the sun, that men could have that far-famed sight, and lying as lifeless and motionless as a picture. For the rich could not even dine beforehand at home, and then go to the common messes with full stomachs, but the rest kept careful watch of him who did not eat and drink with them, and reviled him as a weakling, and one too effeminate for the common diet. Lycurgus went about implementing these laws with 30 of his friends appearing in the marketplace, fully armed for battle. At first, the king thought they meant to kill him, but eventually he joined the conspirators when he found out that all they wanted was to make sure there would be no opposition to the reforms Lycurgus had in mind. Now, Plutarch's book is a lot longer than what I just relayed to you, but as I said previously, that was just some excerpts from his book. But Lycurgus put these laws into place within Sparta, and it's the reason Sparta is the way it is now. However, after inquiring into these two nations, Croesus decides to align with Sparta.